answered in kind. 8. On the projective mind, the desecration of the sacred and the terror of unintegrated desire. There exists a configuration of consciousness in which speech no longer serves meaning but performs exorcism. In this state, language is not a vessel of relation but a ritual of evacuation, an attempt to purge interior turbulence by fastening it onto an imagined exterior culprit. The utterance is not addressed to another. It is hurled away from the self as one might fling a burning object from the hands in panic, believing distance will extinguish the heat. Such a mind does not speak from coherence, it speaks from siege. At its core is a profound estrangement from the body as a site of intelligence. Sensation has been moralized, impulse surveilled, and desire severed from meaning. The organism learns early that certain currents of vitality are forbidden, unspeakable, or damning, not to be understood, but to be eradicated. Yet, energy does not vanish by decree. What is condemned in consciousness returns as obsession in the shadow. Thus, the psyche, unable to tolerate its own vitality, externalizes it. The forbidden is projected outward and then persecuted with fervor. What was once an interior tremor becomes an exterior enemy. What could not be felt becomes what must be destroyed. And the more vehement the denunciation, the more intimate the unacknowledged proximity. This is the paradox of repression. What is denied at the level of awareness becomes compulsive at the level of imagination. The mind circles endlessly around the very material it claims to despise, fixating upon it with a grotesque intensity that betrays not moral clarity, but unresolved entanglement. Hatred, in this sense, is not the opposite of desire. It is desire stripped of permission and armored with fear. Spiritually, this condition represents a rupture between the self and the principle of incarnation. The body is no longer perceived as a living sacrament, but as a liability, something to be controlled, punished, or surveilled. When embodiment is framed as corruption, the psyche seeks purity through dissociation, and purity, once abstracted from compassion, curdles into cruelty. The language that emerges from this rift is often saturated with contamination imagery, darkness, filth, decay, eradication. Such symbols are not accidental. They are the mythic vocabulary of a mind attempting to disown parts of itself by declaring them unclean. The tragedy is that in doing so, the speaker becomes the very vessel of desecration they claim to oppose, wielding words as instruments of violation rather than understanding. There is, embedded within this posture, a deep theological error. The belief that holiness is achieved by exclusion rather than integration. This belief mistakes fragmentation for virtue. It imagines that wholeness can be attained by amputating aspects of human experience rather than illuminating them. In this cosmology, salvation is imagined as escape from embodiment rather than its transfiguration. Psychologically, this manifests as a brittle identity, propped up by rigid doctrines that cannot withstand inquiry. Any challenge to these doctrines is experienced not as dialogue, but as annihilation. Thus, the response is not curiosity, but annihilatory speech, language designed to humiliate, degrade, and expel, thereby restoring the illusion of control. One must understand this is not strength. It is defensive exhaustion. The nervous system of such a being is perpetually braced, oscillating between hypervigilance and collapse. Aggression becomes a stimulant, a way to feel alive when vitality has been cordoned off by fear. The cruelty is not casual, it is compensatory. It fills a void left by the absence of self-acceptance and the terror of interior silence. There is often, beneath this hostility, an unexamined history of shame. Shame not as a fleeting emotion, but as an organizing principle of identity. Shame teaches the psyche that it is unsafe to be seen as it is. From this premise arises a worldview in which exposure equals death and difference equals threat. The world is no longer populated by fellow beings, but by potential mirrors, each one capable of reflecting back what has been buried. To silence the mirror, the speaker attempts to shatter it, but shattered mirrors multiply reflections. Spiritually, this condition represents a refusal of grace, not because grace is absent, but because it feels intolerable. Grace requires openness. It requires the relinquishment of the clenched fist. And for one whose identity is constructed around vigilance and condemnation, openness feels like dissolution. Better, then, to cling to judgment than risk mercy. Yet, mercy is the only solvent that works. Not the mercy that excuses harm, but the mercy that allows the psyche to encounter itself without annihilation. The mercy that says, "You may look without perishing." The mercy that restores curiosity where fear once reigned. When this mercy is absent, the psyche becomes a closed system. It recycles its own toxins. Language grows more extreme, not because conviction deepens, but because sensation dulls. Each utterance must be more incendiary than the last to achieve the same numbing effect. The spiral tightens, the imagination narrows, the world shrinks, and still the ache remains. For no amount of condemnation can heal the original wound, the belief that one's own vitality is damning. No volume of denunciation can reconcile a divided self. No external enemy can absorb the weight of an internal exile. The way out of this labyrinth is neither argument nor humiliation. It is integration. It is the slow, patient reclamation of disowned parts of the self. It is the recognition that what we persecute most fervently often carries the very life force we have been taught to fear. This work cannot be forced. A closed hand cannot receive. A psyche armored in terror cannot hear. Those who are not yet willing to soften must learn by the long curriculum of consequence until exhaustion opens a crack where curiosity may enter. The task of those who witness such speech is not to internalize it, nor to retaliate in kind, but to remain anchored in coherence, to refuse to become what they resist, to speak when speech clarifies, and to step back when presence alone must suffice. For consciousness does not evolve through eradication, but through illumination. Not through annihilation of the shadow, but through its integration into a wider field of awareness. Such is the meaning of metanoia. What is denied returns as violence. What is seen returns as wisdom. And when language is finally restored to its rightful function, not as weapon, but as bridge, what emerges is not victory, but relief. Not dominance, but dignity. Not purity, but wholeness. Thus, when the noise exhausts itself and the psyche grows weary of its own exile, there remains a quieter truth beneath the clamor, that even the most vitriolic speech is a distorted plea for reconciliation with the self, and that reconciliation, when it arrives, is always answered in kind. And those who knew the power of the voice would speak with the precision of surgeons and the restraint of saints.